There's even a mistake in the intro and they don't care. Have I been mishearing this the whole time? Recorded without click so the tempo wanders a bit. How wrong am I? And I've locked everything to the grid. Is it actually good? Well, so I recently published a video about Earth, Wind & Fire's song September, and along with it I did what I always do. I posted a clip from the YouTube video to Instagram and TikTok. In this particular clip, I'm explaining how Verdine White, the bass player, made a mistake during the intro, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It's a fun clip in a fun video, it's easy. But then something unexpected happened. I got comments like this. This led me to ask other musicians to listen to the clip, sending me down a rabbit hole for the next few days, and ultimately leading me to question everything I've ever thought about this song. So let's show the clip so you know the context. Literally does not matter. Now, there's something you need to understand. I've heard this song since I was a kid, and as a bass player, I have played this song probably 1,000 times. That's not really an exaggeration. I did a ballpark estimate, and it's about 1,000. I've always heard this bass part as a mistake, so when I got these comments, I realized that by posting the isolated bass track in the clip, the bass part sounds more intentional. If you listen to it in the context of the song, though, it doesn't quite line up with what the band is doing. So there, it was settled. I dusted off my hands, knowing I was right. But then it kept eating away at me. What if I'm wrong? Have I been mishearing this the whole time? Is it actually syncopated? And is it actually, good? So I sent off some texts to some musician friends asking them to take a listen. I got back things like, I think that's a mistake, and if that is syncopation, he up the syncopation. Okay, cool. I was right. And then my brother texted me. I think it's syncopated, with the this emoji. And you have to understand how devastating this was. My brother is a great musician. He's a jazz drummer who's played on really big records with big artists. I respect his opinion a lot. But all of a sudden, I felt like a character in a movie where like a loved one gets bit by a zombie, and you know what you have to do. But as hard as it is, you got bit! To be clear, he's alive and well. So then I did a poll on my Instagram stories. I posted the isolated bass as well as the original song for context and asked people to vote on whether they thought this was a mistake or intentional. The results? Almost exactly 50-50. This feels like it's the new The Dress or like the Laurel Yanni thing where two people can look at the same thing and see it completely differently. So there was only one thing left to do. Dive into the stems. Okay, so here's why this bugs me and feels like a mistake. If you interpret this bass rhythm as a syncopated thing, it still doesn't really work. The horns are pushing their note a little early and the bass doesn't hit with it. It could be a funky variation, but in the context of what's going on around it, it doesn't line up. The bass is like dancing around that horn hit. It doesn't feel great. Ergo, mistake. So I wanted to see what it would sound like if it did line up with the push. In this case, you've still got that rhythmic variation, but he's still hitting the horn hit with them. Of course, this is all relative. This song is from 1978 and was recorded without click, so the tempo wanders a bit. I've done my best to find the tempo that will line up best for these original stems, but it's not perfect. Just take a look at the first downbeat when the bass comes in. Look at how wide this downbeat is. Everyone's hitting it in a slightly different place. Now, this doesn't bother me at all. If it feels good, it is good, and this feels great. The whole song, except for this one little mistake. This song doesn't line up with the grid perfectly, and I prefer it that way. If it did, it would sound like this.
Do you remember 21st night of September?
This is from the soundtrack from the 2016 movie Trolls. Which one do you prefer? By lining up each part to the grid perfectly, you're losing some humanity. This version definitely sounds more modern, but the original feels so much better. The original September was recorded in 1978 and the rules were a little looser. There was no click, which meant the band had to be good at playing together, which, well, Earth, Wind & Fire absolutely is. Here's my analogy for this. Imagine a bundt cake pan. You fill this pan with Jell-O, let it harden, and turn it out. Then you take the same pan, but fill it with cement, let that harden, and turn that out next to the Jell-O one. You've got two bundt cake things that look pretty similar and are the same shape, but behave very differently. The concrete one is not budging. If I try to shake that, the whole thing is rigid. The Jell-O can move back and forth, wiggle a little, and feel the groove, baby. In the case of September, the Trolls version is made of cement, and the original Earth, Wind & Fire recording is made of Jell-O. But do you want to hear a cement Earth, Wind & Fire version? Okay, this is subtle, but here's that same intro part with the fixed bass mistake, and I've locked everything to the grid. Now it's got a real Trolls vibe, you know what I mean? So I told myself, here's the conclusion. Verdine laid down the bass part. The fourth time on the intro, he goes, "No, I'm gonna try something different." But he didn't quite land it. He forgot about the horn push. So he goes back in the booth and listens to the take, ready for the rest of the band to make fun of him for it, but they don't say anything. And nobody wants to be the guy that's like, "Hey, I know this song's pretty much done, but can we spend a bunch more money on tape just so I can redo that one little part?" I thought that was the end of it. I dusted off my hands again, confident I was reading the situation correctly. This was a mistake, but it wasn't bad enough to fix, and it's close enough that you could hear it either way. It's just a big old thing of jello, and overall, it feels great. But no one would argue that this mistake was actually good. No one's recreating this mistake, because even if it's not that bad, it's not good. Or so I thought. Since I'd listened to the Trolls version, I kept going down the rabbit hole to hear other versions of the song to see if this bass mistake stuck. Earth, Wind & Fire's 1999 Live in Japan album features a new band hit at the beginning, and Verdine hits it with the horns and doesn't play the line in question. Their live album from '94, same thing. Aha! Chalk one up for me. Verdine doesn't even play it live himself. But then I took it to the people, specifically YouTube, to look up tutorial videos, and video after video, I kept seeing the same thing. Bass players playing it exactly like the record, and even going so far as writing out sheet music that includes this mistake. Alright, chalk one up for Team Intentional. So then I went back to the Trolls version, and surely with their modern sounding, locked to the grid, metronomically accurate cement version, they're not gonna let a little bass mistake like that slide, right? Right? Well, Okay, Al McKay, former Earth, Wind & Fire member and co-writer of the song. He left the group in 1981 and has since performed as the Al McKay All-Stars in a show called The Earth, Wind & Fire Experience. Please, Al, you co-wrote the song. Please don't tell me. Al, you got bit! Okay, so I was wrong. I'm not afraid to admit that. Even if I think this was a mistake, which I still do, for some people it's become solidified as part of the song and is being played over and over by lots of different bass players. But then I thought, how wrong am I? I've always heard this as a mistake, but hearing the isolated bass part, that made me realize maybe he plays it again. So I dove back into the isolated bass part to see if he plays that phrase again. He doesn't, but in the process I discovered something else. A lot of legitimate mistakes. We got this one. We got this bad boy. This hairy fella. Not to mention this guy. These are unquestionably mistakes. The timing is off, he's fumbling on notes, and by today's standards, the Trolls standard, this wouldn't fly. But the rest of the song feels amazing, and in context, you can't even tell. Plus, it's 1978, and this is a big old thing of jello, baby. Just let the groove take you. And actually, these mistakes prove my original point even further, that everything Earth, Wind & Fire touches is gold. And for that explanation, you gotta watch this video.